Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Yesterday, I watched a video with two of my favorite booktubers, Eric Carl Anderson and Sarah at the channel Hardcover Hearts. She's in the middle of a trip to England and had the opportunity to meet up with Eric and film a video with him. I loved the simple conceit. Each brought a set of 5 cards, each with the name of one of their favorite English novels. At the end of the video, they talked about a few runners-up as well. What a great discussion it made. When I saw the topic, I immediately came up with a list of my own top 5. My first thought was that almost everyone would name pretty much exactly what was on my list, but of course, that wasn't true at all. So I thought to turn their idea into a tag and ask all of you with channels to put your own spin on the questions. The phrase top 5 English novels could mean the 5 English novels you think are the most important ever written, or the most widely read. But I think it might be more interesting to talk about your own top 5 favorites. Or perhaps you want to set more specific parameters, the top 5 21st century English novels, or 18th century novels, or perhaps your top 5 favorite English novels written by authors born elsewhere. Or maybe restrict yourselves to books you read after you started watching BookTube, or even that you've read in the past year. I can't wait to see what you come up with. So here's my list, complete with a few runners-up. Warning here, my choices are not going to be at all surprising, I don't think, if you know my channel at all. First, chronologically at least, is by Jane Austen. My very favorite Jane Austen novel is Emma, which has been true since I was a young girl. There are aspects of this book that I now feel are a little creepy, but it doesn't at all stop me from appreciating the novel as a whole. I think one reason I first fell in love with the book is that although there's plenty of romance and matchmaking, the main thrust of the plot seems to be about how Emma matures and becomes more empathetic and understanding of her community. That part of the plot, sort of ignoring the romance at the end, still really moves me. There's something similar about my second choice, Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. Here, too, there are some kinds of icky things in the book, including her choice of partner, maybe. But what I find so meaningful in this book is how much Jane changes herself from a hurt and angry child into a fiercely independent woman. She won't let other people make decisions for her or treat her as anything less than an equal. Just like Emma, Jane Eyre has been important to me for decades. I grew up with both of these books and can't quite imagine reading them without all that personal history attached to every reread. The third book is a departure from that pattern of old favorites. Only in the last few years did I start reading George Eliot. Although I absolutely love Middlemarch and find Daniel Deronda to be endlessly fascinating, the novel of hers I love most is actually Adam Bede. I read it for the first time immediately after I joined BookTube as part of the Victober Knit and Listen group led by Kate Howe and a few other BookTubers a few years ago. I wound up reading a physical copy rather than listening to the audio while knitting, actually, and I really loved the book. There is something similar between the plain and sometimes more realistic Jane Eyre with her fierce independence and Dinah Morris, the beautiful but plain itinerant preacher. Okay, number 4, which is also a fairly recent read, is from the early 20th century. Both Eric and Sarah each name a novel by Virginia Woolf, but my favorite's not the one either of them choose. Sarah listed Mrs. Dalloway, and I must say I love that book very much, partly because of the tremendously well-done annotated version I read last year with notes by the brilliant scholar Merve Imre. Nevertheless, my very favorite Woolf novel is still To the Lighthouse. This book has much of the stream of consciousness style of a lot of other modernist novels, like James Joyce's Ulysses or whatever, but it also feels very intimate, almost like a Well, I was going to say almost like a book that's a private journal that was put away periodically rather than kept consistently. I'm not sure that comment makes sense when there's no first-person narrator, and nothing but an omniscient narrator, or at least a sort of omniscient narrator. My fifth choice is a late 20th century book, Possession by A.S. Byatt. I love Byatt's pseudo-Victorian writing, and the children's book is extraordinarily well done. But Possession, which is perhaps not as perfect as the children's book, is nevertheless my favorite. I think I love it so much because it echoed the life I was living when the novel came out. I was a history graduate student, researching my dissertation just as I was falling in love with the person who soon became my spouse. Like Emma and Jane Eyre, Possession is a book that feels personal. But unlike those two, I've never reread Possession. Maybe I need to fix that. So let me name a couple of runners-up here, books I love almost as much as the 5 I've listed. One of my very, very favorite English writers is Thomas Hardy. I alternate which book is my favorite, Tess or Return of the Native, but really all of his major novels are favorites. I'm definitely a bit of an outlier since my least favorite is Far from the Madding Crowd. All his novels have a really deep connection to folklore and traditional culture. For years, I've been recommending Hardy to my folklore-loving son, and I'm proud to say that this semester he took an intensive class on Hardy's novels, and A fell hard for Hardy. Another English author that has written a whole lot of books that I could imagine putting on a favorites list is E.M. Forster. I suppose my very favorite is A Passage to India. I suspect one of the reasons I love it so much is because of the intense dialogue about how the book is both an acceptance of the rhetoric of colonialist racism and a rejection of it. American books like Huckleberry Finn, To Kill a Mockingbird, even Uncle Tom's Cabin also tread right on that fine line of critiquing and replicating racist thought. As an historian, that just fascinates me. In the case of A Passage to India, as in so much American fiction, ideas about the racialized other are combined with a discussion of sexual assault. It really isn't a feminist book, and yet, we get this complicated picture of a variety of characters, including interesting women trying to come to terms with the changing world and trying to grow, to become more self-aware and more compassionate. It's just a fascinating book. Let's go back in time here for a second. I really enjoyed the novels I've read so far of Anthony Trollope. I know everyone loves his big standalones and some of the major books in his 2 large series, but I want to stand up for what I'll admit is an unusual favorite. I really love the first short novel in the Barsetshire series, The Warden. It's a quiet, gentle little gem about an older man trying to figure out the right thing to do. The book is sweet and charming, but it's also dealing with a question that feels really contemporary: how to balance what's good for the world and what might not be good for the world, despite the fact that we think it is. And how are people going to judge our choices, even if we think we're trying to do something helpful? So one more runner-up book, Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh. Knowing that this book is almost certainly being attacked right now in the U.S. because of its portrayal of a relationship between 2 men, I really want to mention how beautiful this book is and make sure you read it if you haven't yet. It came up in Eric and Sarah's video. But I must admit that while I absolutely love Brideshead, I'm very much not an Evelyn Waugh fan in general. His particular sense of humor in some of his other books, like Vile Bodies and Decline and Fall, feels both stupid and sometimes almost cruel, too. Maybe this is because I'm an American who doesn't get British humor. Actually, I'm quite fond of his send-up of American funereal practices, his novel, The Loved Ones. Very funny. So that will do it for today. I would love to hear your answers to this great question on your own video, or down in the comments if you prefer. Thanks again, Eric and Sarah, for your lovely conversation. See you soon here on Hannah's Books.